All right, today we're going to talk about Chapter 1 in Child Development. This is a real mishmash of materials. All kinds of things are stuck together here. As I'm sure you read in the syllabus, because I know you're all good students, there will be a separate quiz on Chapter 1 because this material, I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong, but it's sort of different from the rest of the book. So chapter 1 sort of will stand alone. We'll take quiz 1 and then we'll move into the other stuff. All right, so first questions we got to answer are some of the simplest things, such as what is child development, right? So by definition, field of study in which researchers from many disciplines work to describe and understand the important changes that take place as children go through childhood. You could have written that definition, right? But in child development, a lot of researchers work together, and nurses, physicians, psychologists, they all work together. They aim to describe and understand the changes in childhood. Sounds like science. This is a branch of science, by the way. We'll get to that. I know you didn't believe it, but we need to understand changes, predict changes, control changes, etc. It's got an understanding of children obviously has implications for helping children. We're going to come to over and over and over. Children do not think like adults. They just don't think the same. And the quicker you can get that through your head if you're working with children, the quicker, the better you can work with them. We're going to talk about physical development. We're going to talk about cognitive development. We're going to talk about socio-emotional development. Now, we talk about them, and it's very interesting. Is that, in fact, taking a step back, there's two different ways that child development texts tend to be written. Our textbook is set up in what we would perhaps call a thematic way. That is, it's going to discuss physical development separate, and then cognitive development separate, and then socio-emotional development separate. Other textbooks are more chronological or something. And they talk about 1-year-olds. What's happening with a 1-year-old physically? What's happening with a 1-year-old cognitively? What's happening with a 1-year-old? This is socio-emotional. Okay? And both approaches sort of have some sensibility to them. I kind of prefer this method where we talk about these separately. But even though I'm talking about these, I'm going to talk about these physical development in the first material exam material, and then the second exam material, and sort of kind of whatever, third. But yet what we're going to find as a common theme is that it's impossible to talk about physical development without also talking about cognitive development. Say, for example, children that are physically mature, that is to say they're physically large for their age, are often treated in a way that they're treated as though they're older. And more is expected of them, even though the little girls, they drink the milk with all the hormones and right when they're 10 years old, and so they have these things and people are treating them like they're grown-ups, but they're still 10-year-olds that should be playing with Barbies. Meanwhile, we're treating them as though they're adolescents. They're not adolescents, okay? So these things do work together. They influence each other. They interact with each other. So we talk about them as though they're separate, but never, ever, ever pretend in your mind that we can truly talk about one without an understanding and integration of the other components. We're going to talk about others as well, but moral development in particular. But these are very interesting. What drives development? Nature and nurture. Duh. If you've ever sat in a psych class before, you know nature and nurture. Nature is, generically speaking, those things that you're born with. Genetics, obviously, biology, limitations, things that govern development. We'll talk a lot more about nature and nurture as we go. Right now, it just needs to be a real generic discussion. And nurture is obviously those conditions that you grow up in that affect development. Okay? Behavior genetics is the actual field of study. It's kind of interesting, but the field of study that attempts to tease apart nature and nurture, because we're going to come across 100 questions. Intelligence, is it nature or nurture? Is a child's intelligence a result of what they're born with or the house they grew up in? Okay? And behavior genetics is a field which attempts to separate those two out and find out the relative importance of each. Say, for example, twin studies are the most obvious, like the gold standard of twin studies. They find some identical twins that have been adopted into separate homes, raised in separate homes. We'll get into it, but suffice it to say for now, identical twins are genetic clones of each other. In theory, they are exactly the same. In theory, their nature is identical, but they're raised in a different home, nurture. Now the question is, how different are they? Any differences between those children when they get to be 20 years old or something must be the result of nurture, because they are genetically exactly the same if they're identical twins. Okay? So it's more complicated, and again, we'll get into more of this. Right now it's real generic. However, going back to my statement on the last slide, this concept of a reciprocal relationship, the idea that people influence children and their development, and children make choices and influence other people. This is, from the simplest perspective, some babies are born with a difficult temperament. Some babies don't like to be held. Some babies it's just the way they're born. And meanwhile, what happens is this child might be born this way, that's its nature. And what happens is that child, in fact, does influence the way that the parents respond to it, okay? Because it's really hard to be a parent and love your baby when your baby's like, ooh, don't touch me, okay? So clearly the child's own behavior feeds back into the environment, okay? Creates the very environment, which is in fact influencing itself in the first place. And yet all of this is fed into by the nature that it was starting with. So we talk about a reciprocal relationship. I mean, we cannot just generically refer to nature and nurture, because to do so implies that the child, in this case the child, is just passive and has just absolutely no influence at all on their environment. Clearly the children do affect their environment. As the children get older, they choose which friends to hang out with. Yes, those friends that they hang out with provide the experiences that we'll call nurture, but those kids, in fact, choose which friends they're going to hang out with. Blah, blah, you know, I don't know. Never mind. Theories. We're going to talk about theories in child development. Theories are, well, the definition of a theory, if you, grab your pencil, write it down. The definition of a theory is, I forgot. A tentative explanation for the facts. In other words, you make a bunch of observations, you see a bunch of stuff, and then you generate a theory to try to explain those facts. Tentative. Always tentative, because the point of science, and yes, this is science, we'll come back to it. It's a tentative explanation, therefore we're going to check those theories. We're going to test whether or not they're true. It's a tentative explanation. At the moment, given what I've got, this is the explanation I'm going with. Okay? They are incredibly important. They provide guidance. They provide, we're going to talk about this. I'm going to lay out the scientific method and the circle involved in the scientific method and stuff. But for now, suffice it to say, they summarize our information. They allow us to predict certain things about the future. That's what they're for. Well, here's a definition of theory. Whatever. An explanation of how facts fit together, allowing us to understand and predict behavior. A tentative explanation for behavior. All right, tentative explanation for the facts that you have known. I'm going to do the scientific method later, so I'm just going to move on. A couple of different theories in child development, or there's many, of course, but I mean, they can be categorized into a few major categories. Psychoanalytic theories are theories that focus on the structure of personality and how the conscious and unconscious portions of the self influence behavior and development. Okay? Freud is full of shit. All right? Keep that one, put that in your notes in the special file. Okay? I'm going to come back to him. Ooh, very influential guy, but full of shit. Okay. Two major researchers that work with the psychoanalytic theory, Freud and Erikson. Both very influential, very, very important. Don't get me wrong, Freud was not wrong. Dare I say this before anybody gets all, I don't like Dr. Bone, he thinks Freud's full of shit. Well, all right, it goes like this. Freudian Freud did a good job of describing how children behave. Freud was full of shit when he described why children behave the way they do. Gotcha? How they behave, good job. Why they behave, baloney, Freud. Give me a break, okay? But we'll get back to that. Oh, mommy, I want you. No, come on. So, Sigmund Freud, very briefly, Sigmund Freud described children as working like this. When a child is born, their personality, their mind has only one component called the id. The id is that part of the personality that's like the gimme part. It's just like when an infant is born, all they know is, I'm hungry, give me food. That's it. That's all they know. They know nothing more than that. Then as the child interacts with the environment, a second part of their personality begins to develop called the ego. And the ego, which really operates on, oh, by the way, the id operates on what they call the pleasure principle. Just gimme, gimme, gimme. If it feels good, just give it to me. The ego, on the other hand, operates on what's called the reality principle. That is, as a kid interacts with the world, they begin to realize that, hey, you know what? I mean, let's say, for example, I'm hungry, and so the id says, gimme, 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 and the baby screams. Well, later on, the kid figures out, hey, you know what? If nobody's in the room and I scream, that's just stupid. Okay, so why don't I at least wait until somebody's in the room? That would be the ego. That would be this interaction with reality. However, hopefully, not always, because sometimes bad people have babies, all right? But here's the deal. Through the interaction with the environment, what the child is going to do is develop a superego, which is sort of a sense of morality, a sense of right and wrong, a sense of good and bad, you know, something like this. And so here's how the world works, okay? Let me put this out. I like this little way to summarize further. Imagine I'm sitting here, and I'm hungry. And my id, operating on the pleasure principle, sits right up here and says, oh, baby, I'm hungry. Give me food now. Gimme food, all right? So the id says, look, there's a girl, she's got a candy bar, just smash her in the face and take it. I want it now. That's like the little devil on your shoulder. Now, along also on the other shoulder, we've got a little angel, a superego. And the angel on the other shoulder goes, no, we don't hit people in the face. We don't steal candy bars, no. Now, in the middle of this, we've got the devil and we've got the angel, and they're fighting little, you've seen these in the cartoons, you know, a little pitchfork, little wings, and okay. Now, put with this, the one in the middle, ego. And in fact, when you translate ego from the German, it literally comes in as the I, something like that. The me, the self, the in. And the ego's job is to get in the middle there and make everybody happy, okay? So the ego says, okay, dude, I got you, id. I know you're hungry. Superego, I understand your needs to not smash people in the face. I got it. Okay. Aha, says the ego, I've got a solution. Just go into your wallet, find yourself a dollar bill, get down to that vending machine, buy yourself your own candy bar, and we got a solution. The id is happy, I'm hungry is solved, the superego is happy, we don't do naughty things. Everybody is got exactly what they need. I know, I'm getting it. Everybody's got exactly what is required. Oh, it doesn't want to move. I got you. So everybody is happy. There you go. Everybody's happy. Superego is happy. Everybody's happy. Okay? And the ego is like, problem solved. Well, unfortunately, sometimes what happens is that a problem arises that cannot be solved. So I'll go with it. Shit. I'll give you the example. Little boys in Freudian theory, this is not a Freud, because little boys in Freudian theory go through this thing called an Oedipal complex where they want mama, all right? Oh baby, I want you. So the id is saying, I want it. And the superego is going, dude, you're kidding, right? That's just messed up, man. That is just messed up. I want it. It's messed up. The ego's job is to get into the middle and make them both happy. Now, in our last example, there was a solution. Go down to the vending machine, buy your own, problem solved. Now, I don't know what kind of solution you're going to find here that's going to make both the id and the superego happy. It ain't happening. So the ego's job is to take care of this problem, okay? So how is it going to do it? Here's the deal. When the id and the superego are in conflict, you feel something called anxiety. Oh my God, I hate anxiety. Anxiety, oh, I feel so anxious. The ego's job is to repress it. You've heard the word, you know the word. The ego's job is to get in the middle, shove that all down. You stick that anxiety down, you repress it, but the problem is it doesn't go away, okay? Now, just because you shoved it down below the level of the consciousness does not mean it disappeared. It's still in there, just waiting to pop out later on in life. And according to Freud, it is these types of experiences in childhood, these stages of psychosexual development which I'll define, and these interactions and problems which create the personality that the child will become. Okay? So I know, it's an interesting story, don't get me wrong, but he's full of shit. Freud took... Erikson rather took Freud's idea, and he said, okay, Freud, you're hung up on sex, dude. Get over it. He says, oh, you know what's more important is the social development, the interactions that the child has with the environment. It's not all about sex, buddy. And so what he did was he revised Freud's theory and added social development. Not only that, but according to classic Freudian theory, children develop, and by the time they're about 12 or 13 or something, they're done. They're cooked. Those kids are finished. According to Erik Erikson, development occurs across the entire lifespan. Okay? So I'm gonna talk a little bit about Erikson here because in an amazing turn of events, Erikson never even pops up again in our textbook. He's a major player in psychology. We'll mention aspects of Erikson, but Erikson himself never pops up again. Freaks me out. He should be in there more. So here's what Erik Erikson said. Children go through a series of crises. Now this is social, right? This is development. That is, the child's personality develops in interaction with the world, the social world that they live in. Okay, and when a baby is first born, see, in the first year, in fact, take a look, birth to 1 year. Okay. In that first year, the baby's going to go through this crisis, which Erikson called basic trust versus mistrust. What's going to happen is the baby's going to, through interactions with their environment, either learn to trust the world or learn that the world is not really a place that I can work with. Say the child's hungry, but nobody responds. Nobody feeds them. Well, according to Erik Erikson, this child will develop a basic sense of mistrust, okay? And I mean, it's obviously, it's not like a yes-no thing. It's not like, well, this child developed trust, this child developed mistrust. Well, duh, it's somewhere in the middle, right? Just, you're along a continuum here. But see, what happens is that children are going to go through these stages, and as I said, there's 8 of them. And they're kind of attached to a chronological age order here. And here's the deal. I mean, when a kid gets to be 2 years old, no matter what happened at that first stage, whether it was a good outcome or a bad outcome, you're moving on, buddy. You're going to now deal with the second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. And in the second stage, children are going to be establishing whether or not they can, they can control the world, or whether or not they are able to do things successfully, complete tasks, or whether or not they should doubt themselves, okay? Now, I don't want to get into all of these stages because I just, it would take 3 hours, right? Well, not 3 hours, but more than I want to deal with, okay? And so the people go through these stages of social development throughout their lifetime, and according to Erik Erikson, the way that they solve these crises will in fact be influential. So you as a grown-up, your mature personality that you have, mature. Good luck with that. Your grown-up personality, the one that you have now, is a result of the outcomes of these earlier crises. Okay. Some other theories involve behaviorism. Behaviorism is kind of a cold and rigid thing. By the way, I'm a behaviorist, so you see how cold and rigid I am. All right. Behaviorism is a, how can I keep this into child development? Anyway, behaviorism is a way of thinking that says the most important thing is in fact the behaviors. Now, Freud is like, oh, they have these internal conflicts and blah, 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 blah. Behaviorism, in a very rigid reading of behaviorism, would say, I really don't give a shit what your internal conflicts are. How does a kid act? How does a kid behave? Okay? What are the physical behaviors that are exhibited by that child? Okay? And so behaviorism takes as its useful point classical and operant conditioning, the principles of learning theory. And that is, you know, rewards and punishments, things of this nature. Clearly, classical conditioning or learning theory has a lot to tell us about child development because children learn an awful lot of things. Even going back to Freud, though he didn't say it, because Freud doesn't, you know, whatever. Freud's full of shit. But he even talked about how the superego develops in interaction with the environment. When you say in interaction with the environment, what you're really saying is the child is being rewarded for certain things and punished for certain things and learning a sense of right and wrong based on watching what mom and dad do. Yeah, that's going to be observational learning in a minute, okay? So clearly, even Freud had components of this in his theory. And of course, you are familiar with the Pavlov's classic experiment, right? I don't know, whatever, you know, you give a dog food and they drool. This is not learned. If you play a little, in this case, I guess that's a tuning fork, the dog goes, huh, what the, okay. And then after a while, later on, what you do is you play the tuning fork and then you give the dog food and the dog drools. And the dog's like, okay, oh, I like food, okay. And then after you do that a while, you just play the tuning fork and the dog drools, right? And so what we find is that this was what we call an unlearned reflex, right? It's just what dogs do. You put meat in and they drool. This, however, at this point, once we've gone through all of this, this is what we call a learned reflex, okay? This is not, you know, not natural. This is not the way the world works. This is only because of this behavior is only present due to interaction with the environment, experiences with the environment, okay? This is natural, this is learned, okay? That's kind of the idea, is that much of what children become comes in this way. And here is a very silly example, just because a lot of students say they get Pavlov and the dogs and the bells, and they're like, oh, how does that relate to me, right? So here's a very silly example. I don't know the truth of it. It's maybe too good to be true. But this is an example that was put out by David Myers, who was the author of many, many textbooks, including the general book I usually use and the social psych book I generally use. He's a good guy. Well, here's his basic idea. Just like with the dogs and the bells and the food, when you do a passionate kiss, oh, baby, ooh la la, huh? Right? Okay? This is an unlearned reflex. It's just what happens. So now David Myers, he describes his girlfriend he had in college who had this real passion for onion-flavored potato chips. Okay? So she's then what happens? They go and they start making out. But before they start making out, as she's coming in for the kiss, Dave Myers describes how he smells the onions. So he smells the onions and then, oh baby, ooh la la baby. All right? This is an unlearned reflex, right? This is just, that's all I did, right? Brought it down, except I added the onion breath at the beginning. And just like with the dogs, you do this enough times, and you smell onion breath, and you're ready to get your freak on, right? I mean, come on. That's how it works. So we find that this dogs and bells and drooling seems kind of silly, but truth is, it's really what we are. John Watson took behaviorism a little bit further, and he had, in fact, actually, John Watson was the first guy to advocate behavioral therapies. Okay, it's a little side note, but it's behavioral therapy is a branch of therapy whereby John Watson says much of what we are is a result of learning. I mean, the principles of learning. Whether there would be good behaviors or bad behaviors, it's a result of learning. Okay, and so according to John Watson, if you happen to have learned something and it happens to lead to a bad behavior, guess what? Unlearn it. Okay, and so maybe you've heard of like systematic desensitization or flooding or token economies. There's a variety of things, but the idea is that if you've learned a bad behavior, you can unlearn that behavior. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so he did a classic study though that went in and took this principle of classical conditioning forward. Okay. So here's the deal. This is just like, dogs and drooling and David Myers and his freaky girlfriend. And what we got is, if you take a loud sound and you go up behind a baby, all right? In fact, we'll take John Watson's example. He had a big metal bar and a hammer, and he sneaks up behind the baby. I'm sneaking. Dong! Right behind the baby's head. The baby screams his ass off, all right? The baby is scared shitless. That's just an unlearned reflex. Children do not need to be taught to be afraid of loud sounds. So then what John Watson does is he brings in this little white rat, and he puts it on the table, and there's this kid on the table, Baby Albert, in case you ever heard of him. And Baby Albert's like, oh my God, this is awesome. He starts playing with the rat, and he's all tickly, and he's running on me. Oh, it's so cool. All right, whatever. Then he sneaks up behind Albert. Dong! Albert screams his ass off. He's not screaming because of the rat, right? He's screaming because you just banged a bar behind his head, man. So now, John Watson took Albert, let him calm down. Okay, calm down, Albert. Oh, it's all going to be okay. And once Albert got all calmed down, they brought the rat out again. And, oh, God, I love it. Okay, dong, yeah. Imagine now we repeat this about 5 times. After 5 times, they bring the rat out the 6th time. And as soon as Albert sees the rat, he goes, oh, hell no. He just takes off running. He doesn't want anything to do with that rat. Okay? And that's classical conditioning. That's dogs and drooling. That's Dave Myers and his freak girlfriend. It's just who we are. Now, this is interesting. However, what's even more interesting, yeah, they'll bring out the rat and he's still afraid. Even more interesting, Albert was now also afraid of rabbits. Rabbits, you say? Yes, also afraid of rabbits. That's why I got this picture. I don't know how well. Yeah, you can see it on your own image, right? Look at that. You got the Easter Bunny sneaking up behind my daughter. She's, oh my God. I've never seen a girl so scared as that. I don't know what happened there, but good picture. But Albert became afraid of rabbits and Mom's fur coat and Santa Claus. Fuzzy white beard. Albert became afraid of all kinds of freaky shit. And what was John Watson's point here, besides being a cruel, sadistic bastard? The point behind his work was that you, as a complex grown-up, you're grown-up, you're complex, oh my God, look at how big that personality is, yet no matter how complex you are nothing more than the product and the result of these types of situations which created you into the mature, again with the mature, created you, the complex adult you've become. You're simple. That's all it is. It's simple stuff. It looks complicated because you've got thousands of these similar experiences going on, which all mishmash together into this big pile of craziness, but this is all it is at the beginning. It's just simple classical conditioning principles of learning. Okay? Skinner took it one step further and talked about the consequences of behavior, reinforcements and punishments in particular. he talked about how children are learning through reward and punishment. And I mean, they better be. Okay, my kid comes home with a bad grade on his report card, bang, and I damn well better learn something from that, right? I didn't do it for fun. So, anyway, we'll come back later to talking about whether it's ethical to punish your child. Okay, all right. So, operant conditioning has as its root this simple statement, the law of effect. It's a lot of words here, but basically, if you do something, and as a result of that, it's followed by something you like, it's more likely you're going to do it again. All right? If you do something and it's followed by something you don't like, that increases the chance that you will not do it again. That's just reinforcement and punishment. Okay? And so the idea is that the behaviors that we exhibit are influenced by the consequences of that behavior. Okay? Taking it one step further, now don't get me wrong, classical and operant conditioning are incredibly cool. Take my learning class sometime, I swear to God, we'll talk about each one of those for 3 weeks, all right, or not more. But perhaps more interesting is social learning. We as humans are uniquely designed for social learning. Now, all animals, I mean, look at Pavlov's study with the dogs and the bells. Skinner's main research, in fact, I did all my dissertation work with operant conditioning. I used pigeons. I used rats for my thesis. It was all operant conditioning work. Observational, however, is different. Social learning, rather. Observational, different class, I guess. Social learning is different. Social learning is to learn, well, let's say, for example, this. You could either have, a kid could either put their hand on the stove and say, oh shit, that hurts, and not repeat it. That's operant conditioning. Or the kid could watch his stupid little brother put his hand on the stove and burn his hand and then go, shit, if I put my hand on my stove, I bet you that would hurt. Maybe I shouldn't do that either. And the kid can learn without ever actually doing the thing. I mean, this is just beautiful. It's just, not only that, we can take it even further, this social learning thing. And guess what? Mom could say, hey, dudes, don't put your hand on the stove. It's going to hurt like hell. Neither kid has to burn their hand, and both kids have learned. All right? So really, this social learning concept allows us to really expand how much we can learn and what we can learn and in which ways we can learn it. Well, Albert Bandura was probably is the granddaddy of all the social learning work. Children learn not just about rewards and punishments. They learn about the probable rewards and punishments of their own actions. Okay, it's very, very cool. As I sort of said, humans are. This is a little sidetrack, by the way. Humans are uniquely. I mean, all animals can benefit from social learning. Like baby birds, they learn their each bird species has their own unique little song, and a lot of evidence shows that younger birds, though they seem to have some wiring special for it, but still, these younger birds, they imitate the older birds. The older birds go chirp chirp, and they go chirp chirp, and then they go chirp 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 chirp, and then they go chirp 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 chirp. And so they have this real complex thing, but that's how baby birds learn. However, baby birds can't really learn algebra through social learning. They can't learn how to drive a car through social learning. They can't. I mean, there's huge limitations. Humans are uniquely designed for social learning, and in fact, we have this area in our brain called the mirror neuron system. The mirror neuron system is that part of our brain that responds in response to other people's behaviors. Here, for example, give somebody an electrical shock. Oh, shit. Okay, this is the area of their brain that is active. Now, here's the area of the brain active if you are watching somebody you love get an electrical shock. Empathy. Very similar overlap. Huge overlap between the actual act of feeling pain and the act of watching someone you love in pain. Okay? So this notion that we can learn, that we are uniquely designed to learn from other people is the result of the mirror neuron system. Okay, it's a very cool one. Again, you take my biological psych class, this one is not just a slide, this one is a whole lecture. Okay, good stuff. Going back to Albert Bandura, here's his basic study. He takes the little kids, he brings them into his lab, and he shows them a video. And in this video, there's this woman, she goes, you know, by the way, Bandura actually did like 100 versions of this all across thousands and thousands of kids. I'm just giving you the basic rundown, and then I'll kind of talk about some expansions, the basics. So the kids watch a video, and in this video, this woman, she comes into this room, and there's a Bobo doll, this inflatable doll. I don't know if you've ever had one. It's got sand in the bottom. So when you knock it over, it just stands itself back up. It's kind of a cute little toy, and it's good for getting out your, all right? Good for that, okay? So she comes in, and she starts just beating the shit out of this doll, you know? She hits it with a toy hammer. She kicks it across the room. She sits on top of it, pounds it in the face, and she says very specific things. You know, like, pow, punch it in the nose, beat him down. I don't remember what she all said, but she says some of these words, okay? Then they take these kids that watch this video, and they put them in a room full of toys. I mean, good toys, the good stuff, man. And the kids go into this room, and they play it for about a minute and a half, and then they come in and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we have to save these toys for some other kids. You got to go to this other room. So they take them to this other room with much more boring toys, okay, much more boring. But one of the toys in that room happens to, in fact, be this Bobo doll, okay? So now what are the kids going to do? You show them a woman beating the crap out of a Bobo doll, you piss them off, and then throw them in that room. What do you think happens, okay? And so, no surprise, what happens is the kids tend to imitate her, right? And so he did many versions, and in different versions he showed either a man or a woman, and if it was a woman, then girls were more likely to imitate her. If it was a man, then boys were more likely. That's important. We'll come back to that. He also did a live versus in a video, and if they did a live demonstration, there was much more imitation than if it was a videotape demonstration. But perhaps more interesting than all of these are good studies, but more interesting is the version where they get to the end of the video, she pounds on it, and at the end, there are consequences, okay? And in this situation, what happens is she gets to the end, and she's either rewarded. She gets to the end, and she beats the crap out of the doll, and then person comes in and goes, you are such a strong champion. Have some 7-Up and some Cracker Jacks. Seriously, it was 1962. I guess 7-Up and Cracker Jacks is the best they could get, right? So they got their 7-Up and Cracker Jacks, and she's eating, I guess, a Hershey's bar, too. Just, oh, my God, awesome. You are so good. In the punished category, she gets to the end of the video, and she beats up her doll, and then the guy comes out and says, how can you pick on that doll? Stop picking on that doll, you big meanie. You can't, and it just goes on and on and on, and this woman just, tries to run away, and she trips and falls down, and this guy takes a rolled up newspaper and spanks, I'll punish you even harder next time if you're naughty, you naughty girl, you know, something like that. So it's really crazy, right? So lo and behold, if the model gets rewarded, then the kids are put into that room, you know, piss them off, put them in that room. The kids are more likely to follow that behavior, okay? If she was given Cracker Jacks and 7-Up, and you put me in that room, I'm going to beat the shit out of that doll. If she was punished, and this is hilarious, boys aren't all that smart, okay? Any boys that are in my class, trust me, it's true, we're stupid. Boys didn't really respond. They had some response, you don't get me wrong. When the model was rewarded, they had more physical aggression than when they were punished. But look at the girls in particular. If that woman was rewarded at the end, they showed much more aggression than if she was punished at the end. Those girls definitely figured it out. The boys, somewhat, okay? And then if there were no consequences, then the amount of imitation was just about in the middle. Okay? So it's interesting stuff. We are learning. We are learning from our environment. Taking it further, though, I don't want it to be so simple as, oh, children learn aggression. We'll get to the aggression and what they're learning. Trust me, it's one of my pet peeves. But what else? You know what children are learning besides that superego that Freud talked about? They're also learning things like personality traits, okay? Children learn in some incredibly complex way. They learn to be introverted or extroverted. They learn to be conservative or liberal, right? But they can also learn problem-solving skills, right? That's what this kid's learning, okay? They can learn aesthetic preferences. Yeah, what's good art, right? Not the modern. Ooh, never learned that one. They can learn specific skills, but they can also learn real general skills. General skills like helping behaviors, okay? These are things, in fact, I, as a parent, here's another side note for you that I promise I'll come back to many, many, many times. You thought that being a dad meant, oh baby, let's have fun tonight? Yeah, no, sorry. For the rest of your life, your job is going to be the role model. For the rest of your life, your job is going to be demonstrating things that you want your children to do. It sucks. You never are off. You don't get a weekend. In fact, the weekends are worse because that's when they really got their eyes on you, okay? So it's your job as a parent always to be on guard because kids are watching and kids are learning, okay? Another theory, very, very big theory, which I'm going to just glaze over here because this one pops up for like 2 full chapters, okay? Piaget's cognitive developmental theory, a theory that focuses on how children adjust their understanding as they explore and learn about the world, okay? Children's cognitive development is, you know what, I'm just totally not going to talk about this now, because I can't really talk without getting details, and we're so much going to get it. Suffice it to say, children develop these schemas, these ways of understanding the world, and these ways of understanding the world are somewhat often naive. You know, like a child will develop an understanding of dogs, you know, like anything with 4 feet that runs around. And then they're going to find a cow, and they're like, dog, and they're like, no, that's not a dog, that's a cow. And the kid's like, oh, okay. Now I have to adjust what dog means. And so this concept of cognitive development is this concept of developing these categories of understanding called schemas, okay? Developing these categories of knowledge that get adjusted, assimilation and accommodation, they get adjusted. I'll talk about these processes. These are the processes of adjusting these categories. And that true knowledge, and this is, oh man, we're going to get some Greek philosophy, buddy. Get ready. True knowledge comes from understanding not just these categories and adjusting them as necessary, but understanding how these categories work with each other. In fact, if I had to define wisdom, wisdom would be a knowledge, an understanding of how the different categories of knowledge around the world interact with each other, not just knowing stuff. If you want to be a champion on Jeopardy, I would not call you a wise man, all right? I love Jeopardy. But I'm going to tell you something. If you want to know all this shit on Jeopardy, pull out your phone. All right? It's all on there. Wisdom goes beyond that. And that's what this refers to, is not just the generation of knowledge, but the generation of interaction of that knowledge. Vygotsky, again, we're going to spend quite a bit more time somewhere else. Suffice it to say, Vygotsky, what he does is he incorporates culture. And this is important. I mean, we saw, say, Freud, oh, sex, blah, 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 sex equals development. Then along came Erickson, and Erickson goes, dude, no, you interact with the social world, okay? Come on, buddy. Well, same thing here. Vygotsky's like, okay, I got you. Piaget, you're pretty smart with that whole cognitive thing that we will definitely expand upon. But you're ignoring the fact that a child grows up in a specific culture. And the specific culture that a child grows up in will, in fact, be an incredibly important component of their cognitive development. We'll definitely pull that apart in like chapter 3 or something. I don't remember. The information processing approach is a little bit different. It's based on cognitive psychology. I don't know. Well, here, a theoretical approach focusing on how children perceive, store, and retrieve information and how they solve problems and communicate with others. I can't really, without turning this into an entire class, I don't know how to, suffice it to say, it's like memory, the processes of memory and the storage and whatever. Take a cognitive class. Perhaps more interesting, to me, more interesting is biological theories. And ethology is an area of study that focuses on the adaptive value of behaviors that either from, rooted in Darwin's theory of evolution, like from a simplest perspective, ethology might study why a squirrel buries nuts, something like that. Why is the behavior? Well, because the behavior of burying nuts has led to survival. That is, in the past, there were some squirrels, and some dug holes and buried their nuts, and some did not. Those that did not died. Those that did survived. And so, what's the value? What is the survival value of burying nuts? Hey, gotcha. So, that's pretty straightforward and simple. We could talk about those types of behaviors with humans, but we could take it one step further, and we could also talk about how human behaviors, of course, each child is born in a unique environment that they need to survive and thrive, and so they establish behaviors. Sometimes it may look maladaptive and weird when taken out of context, but they develop behaviors that help them to survive and thrive in their home, in their unique environment. And so to understand these behaviors, one must understand the survival value, the adaptive value of those behaviors. Okay? To look simply at the behaviors is idiotic. It does not reveal anything. If all you did is looked at squirrels burying nuts with zero understanding of why they're doing it, that would be stupid. All right? You wouldn't learn anything about the squirrel. Neuropsychology is an area of study that focuses on the brain and the nervous system using CT scans, positronic emission tomography, functional magnetic resonance imaging, all kinds of different techniques to study how processes in the brain, whether normal or abnormal, affect the way the child develops. And it's very cool stuff. Ecological systems theory, I'm not familiar with this one. I can give you that much on it. I just don't know ecological systems theory, but suffice it to say, focusing on the complex set of systems and interacting social layers that can affect child's development. That is to say, children have different social interactions. Not all social interactions are the same. And so they talk about a microsystem, how children's social interactions with their parents, and how these can influence the child. However, the child is also having interactions with the neighborhood. And it turns out that the interactions with the neighborhood will then in turn affect how they interact with their parents. Okay? And there's an exosystem, friendships that they might have, and values, and I don't know. And suffice it to say, these different layers of social relationships influence each other. Read your book. I am not doing justice to it. I know that is a fact. What can I say? I can't be an expert on everything. There's an interesting image. I don't know. Take a look. And the dynamic system series talks basically an understanding that, and it's related to that concept that relationships are two-directional. That relationships change. The social relationships change across time. They interact and change. It's not a fixed system. They in fact influence each other. It's pretty complex, and again, it's kind of outside of what I'm familiar with. Okay. Wow, there's a lot of words on that one. If you feel like reading all of that, pause, read. Wow. All right, so first thing, what I want to do is spend a little bit of time, not a lot, because this is boring as me too, okay? But I got to talk a little bit about science. I mean, I love science. I am Mr. Science. I wish I was Mr. Science. If I could get paid to be Mr. Science, I don't know if I'd be here, okay? Good stuff. The scientific method is a process by which researchers test hypotheses by making systematic observations. Very, very briefly. Um, well, let me just quick see what's on my next slide before I say anything. Yeah. The scientific method, suffice it to say, whatever. Let me just go on. Let me go on. I don't want to do that. Descriptive methods are research methods that describe a behavior of interest, such as how often it occurs and under what conditions. All right, I guess I got to do it. I got to do Francis Bacon. I love Francis Bacon. Anybody? Bacon. All right, whatever. Just for the benefit of you newbies that haven't heard that one. Francis Bacon was the father of science, and Francis Bacon taught us a few things, but he says, hey, the goal of science, there's really only one goal of science, and the goal of science is this, are you ready for this? Make the world a better place. Done. End of story. There is nothing more as a goal of science. So now, in order to make the world a better place, there are certain things you got to do, and in fact, he broke it down into 2 stages. Number 1, he said, you got to understand the world. Then number 2, you got to take that knowledge and you got to apply it. Okay? You only make the world a better place when you apply it. But in order to apply it, you must understand it. Got it? It's a 2-stage process. Make the world a better place. So now that's Francis Bacon for you. So now I'm going to talk about some of these research methods. And some of these research methods, they sound so obscure and blah, blah, blah. Don't get me wrong. I'm generally not an applied kind of guy. I'm more of a basic researcher kind of guy. But most of this stuff is like, let us understand the world so that we can actually do something useful with it. Okay? That's what it's about. Understanding the world so that we can, in fact, apply it to make the world a better place. Descriptive methods to help us understand the world by simply watching things and describing them. Okay? Often we use these types of methods to create the predictions, to create the hypotheses, to generate the theories, right? These are the observations which feed into to create the theories that we need to do this whole science-y thingy, okay? Naturalistic observation, we could go to a kid's home and then watch them in their home. Hope they behave normal, okay? Structured observation is similar, but you often bring it into a lab setting. Now this is, in fact, again, another little side note, but in science there's two different ways to do research. You can do research in the field, in this case in a kid's house, but I mean it could be at the mall or at the park or something. Do it in the field or do it in a laboratory. What happens is in a laboratory you can control things. You can make sure everything is cool and this is happening and that is there. But people, when they get to a laboratory, they tend to be hesitant and they tend to act funky and weird. In their own home or the mall or the park, they tend to act normal because that's where they are. Okay, but unfortunately, is this kid acting this way because that's the way he normally behaves, or is this kid acting this way because in this particular exact day, there's this cute girl over there, and that's in fact the reason that this boy is showing off on the slide. All right? Why is the kid showing off on the slide? If I was in my lab, I could control that. I could say, for some children, I'll bring in a little pretty girl, and for some children, I will have no little pretty girl. And so I could control that and find out the reason that the kid was showing off on the slide was the girl or not the girl. Here, the kid is showing off on the slide, but I don't know why. Okay, I have no idea why, because so we see more natural behavior, but we don't have the ability to isolate it and say exactly what the causes are. Some other descriptive methods can be things such as self-reports. You just ask people, how do you feel, right? What do you do? You ask a parent, tell me about your kid, right? We got to be careful, though, because I'm a parent, my kids are perfect. Ask me a question sometime about my kids, and I'm going to tell you whatever is the best answer, that's what my kids do. Well, okay, that's maybe a little bit exaggerated, but that's how most parents are, okay? So when you try to get some understanding of behavior by asking a parent, you're going to get the rosiest of the answers, okay? A case study, what you might do is you might look at a few children. In fact, this is what Piaget did. Piaget had some faults. We'll fault him later, but he's clever. He's a clever dude. But he had some faults. In particular, the crux of his theory comes from watching his own children, okay? Just a few. And so it's an interesting way to learn things because you can learn in detail because you can watch a couple of children for months and months and months in many situations. But unfortunately, what's happening is that what you're seeing might be unique to that child, might not generalize to any other child. Therefore, you want to say, oh, this kid did this, therefore that kid will. No. Remember, one of the main important things behind this sciencing is prediction. I want to be able to predict what a kid's going to do. And just because little Jimmy did doesn't mean little Johnny will do. Okay? The goal is to predict. You want to know if Johnny's going to become suicidal or some shit like that, right? And if you did your work with a case study on Jimmy, that doesn't tell you nothing about whether Johnny's going to be having problems. Okay? So it is what it is. Okay? It's legitimate research techniques, but it's got limitations. Correlational methods are research methods where we simply grab two pieces of information and find out the relationship between them. We're going to come across some interesting ones later. Later on, well, the simplest in something like this is like the relationship between a kid's, like a college student's SAT score when they get admitted and the grades that they receive when they graduate. And it's quite strong that if SAT scores are high, then grades tend to be high. Or different correlations. I mean, there's thousands, but I mean, socioeconomic status and children's mood disorders or yeah, whatever. You know, if socioeconomic status is low, mood disorders tend to be high. And I mean, there's many thousands of relationships out there. Hey, be careful though, these are not causal. I'm not saying being poor causes, depression. I did not. No. I just said there's a relationship, okay? And that is a severe limitation behind correlational methods. They can allow you to discover some types of relationships and things that are true, but they can never tell you why they're true, okay? And this is important, but remember Francis Bacon's goal was to make the world a better place. And you cannot make the world a better place. At this point, I mean, we've talked about descriptive techniques and correlational techniques, and now I have a better understanding of how the world works, but I don't know why the world works. And if you want to make the world a better place, you damn well better understand why. Because we're going to come back to the last thing, and that is to control, to change the environment, to fix the environment, to make the world a better place. And at this point, given this knowledge, you ain't got what it takes to figure it out. That's not a good one. In an experiment, and I like experiments. My PhD is in experimental psychology, not correlational, descriptive. No, experimental psychology. This is the stuff. This is the dope, man, because you want to understand how the world works, why things are happening. This is the way to do it. Because if you want to make the world a better place, you got to know why and how, and these are the answers. In a true experiment, the experimenter will manipulate an independent variable to see if it causes changes in a dependent variable. I'm going to show you some examples to look at instead. This is my favorite example. Now, I don't know about any y'all, but I'll tell you, back in 1999, when my wife was pregnant with our first child, we'd go into them doctors' offices, the OBGYN, and man, everywhere you looked, there was breast is best, breast milk, breastfeed, breast. I'm a big fan of movies, but come on. And they guilted the shit out of them women for this. If you don't breastfeed your baby, you have handicapped and crippled your child forever, and you're a terrible mother. And it was like, oh my God, these women, they got to have a full-time job for a lot of reasons. I mean, give me a break, And so if you don't breastfeed, you suck as a mother, you're a failure. And I was like, damn, really? Are you shitting me? So finally somebody came along and said, let me check that, all right? You're laying out some pretty heavy claims. Let's check. So what they did was they took these babies, and I don't know how they did this because this seems like a pretty clever study. They randomly assigned them. When the mothers were pregnant, they said, hey, would you like to be in this experiment with us? And these women said, sure, yes, some no. Okay, now, Here's the key. Before the babies were born, they put all these mamas' names in a hat, and they pulled them out of the hat randomly. This is random assignment. I'm going to come back to it. This is the only thing that makes it a true experiment. If you did not have this step, put the names in a hat, shake up the names, pull them out. Name 1, you're in the experimental group. Name 2, you're in the control group. Okay? If you did not do this step, you do not have an experiment, you cannot establish cause and effect, and if you cannot establish cause and effect, you cannot understand how the world works, you cannot make the world a better place. Done! Boom. This is the one. So now, they randomly assign these mothers to either be in the experimental condition, the breast milk condition, or the control condition, formula. And so then what they did was they had a real, they controlled this entire study, and they had the women pump the breast milk. You know, pumping the breast milk, oh my God, that machine, oh my God, the noise it makes. Anybody's ever heard the noise, you will never forget the noise of a breast pump pumping. So anyway, just saying, I unfortunately have sat through such an experience at 2 in the morning, okay? So they pumped the breast milk and put it into a bottle. And so now the children are given bottles, whether they be formula or breast milk. And the children then, they followed them up at age 8 and they checked the intelligence. And so the manipulation, the independent variable, the thing that was manipulated was what type of food? Food, I guess. What was measured, the dependent variable, was IQ score at age 8. And lo and behold, given this experiment, what we find is that there's no difference. None. Oat milk doesn't do nothing for you. Well, whatever. But this is the key. Why are all these doctors' offices guilting you? Because there is a correlation, a strong relationship between breastfeeding and intelligence scores. And all kinds of success scores. Children that are breastfed are more successful in life. Fact. But here's the deal. Women that breastfeed have certain characteristics. Number 1, chances are they don't have a job. Chances are they're staying home. Which means, guess what? They have more time to interact with the child. Which means that they probably have more money because daddy makes enough money that mama doesn't have to go out and work. So, in other words, kids that are breastfed have all kinds of other advantages going on. Yes, breastfed children succeed much more in life, but it is not the breast milk that is causing it. It is those social factors that are allowing that mother to breastfeed in the first place. Okay? So, this is a very interesting study, and maybe we can finally put don't get me wrong, I still think breastfeeding is best for your baby. But some of the militant mothers that are just guilting the shit out of a person that doesn't, I don't want to date myself, but just last week they had the 4-year-old breastfeeding on the cover of Time magazine. Check it out. It is creepy, man. 4-year-old. All right? As soon as your kid has lost their first set of teeth, you got to stop eventually there, right? Creepy. You can study development by looking at children as they get older. 2 different ways we could do this. A cross-sectional type of research is one where we, like say for example, we want to compare the cognitive development of children. So we're like, I don't know, I'll keep it simple. I'll grab some 4-year-olds, some 5-year-olds, some 6-year-olds, some 7-year-olds, and I'll give them all, I don't know, the STAR test, the Texas State, I don't know what it stands for yet. But, give them that test that the state of Texas did and get their score. Oh my God, 4-year-old score this, and 5-year-old score this, and 6-year-old score this. Lovely. And that would tell you something about how age and cognitive development match. But unfortunately, the 4-year-olds have different experiences than the 7-year-olds. Let's say they grew up in a different, I don't know, it's 3 years, but a different era. They had different programs, okay? The 7-year-olds grew up with Dora the Explorer, and the 4-year-olds did not. And maybe there's something about having that Dora which actually influenced those 7-year-olds or something. We don't know, okay? So a second solution would be to look at those 4-year-olds, score them, wait a year, look at them, same children when they're 5, score them. Look at those same children when they're 6, score them. This is probably a better way to assess how age and development interact with each other, but this is much harder because already 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, it's a 4-year job. 1 year, one shot. Bring in these kids and just measure them. 4 years, if not more, depending on how long you want to take it out there. Blah, 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 blah. Ethics, all right. Ethics research with children. Never use more than 220 volts, ever. All right, this is a gag, all right? You don't shock kids, right? Although they do have those bedwetting blankets that zap a kid. Well, we'll talk about a bedwetting blanket, I'll bet you, at some point. All right, dude. I'm up. Okay. You always, I mean, these are sort of true of all psychological research. Suffice it to say, I'm not terribly familiar with the ethics of research with children. I don't research with children. But I am familiar with the ethics of research with adults. Suffice it to say, the ethics for research with children are the same as the ethics for research with adults, but magnified, okay? Because kids are much more fragile, okay? So we need to make sure that any risk that a child might possibly have is far outweighed by the benefits that will be received, okay? You got to make sure that you're using procedures that are not harmful, not just non-harmful at the moment, but something that won't cause harm later either. You got to get informed consent. You got to get permission from the parents. Unforeseen consequences. That goes back to that one that I just said. Confidentiality and approval from an institutional review board. Yeah, whatever. So where does this knowledge work in? Some people that are going into counseling inevitably will be interacting with children in some way, shape, or form. Whether they be counseling children per se, or counseling families with children, or perhaps even counseling people that have children. I'm sorry to tell you, but as soon as I became a father, one of the most important words to describe me as a person is dad. All right, it becomes part of my integral personality, and were I to go into counseling, even if my kid was not in the room, he damn well better be a big part of my conversation, okay? In education, teachers need to learn, figure out how kids work to maximize their potential. In particular, when we talk about Vygotsky and Piaget, we'll talk about some incredible things here where teachers can maximize children's learning by giving them sufficient difficulty, by making it difficult enough, but not too difficult. Anybody working with children can benefit from this knowledge. Families, yeah, if you want to be a parent, you ought to take this class. It's important. Social policy, yeah, they attempt to improve the lives of children and families. We'll talk more about some of this later, but yeah, whatever. You can read this, okay? Blah, blah, blah. Careers that you might have. Yeah, okay. All right, whatever. I'm done with chapter 1. So, next time I see you, hopefully you will have taken that first quiz. All right?